everyone. I'm David Carter, founder of the TCPA Defense Force, and I'm coming to you from our new home at Womble Bond Dickinson. You know, when I think about 2018, I see so many rapid changes and developments on the TCPA landscape. So my colleagues and I, we decided we'd put together our top 10 countdown list, looking back at all the major stories of 2018 on the TCPA. This involves developments at the courts and the FCC. My colleagues and I have put together the list, and here we go.
At number 10 on our 2018 video countdown are the hundreds and millions in fines imposed by the FCC against robocallers and serial call spoofers for TCPA violations. For example, in May of last year, the FCC imposed a $120 million fine against Adrian Abramovich for engaging in a practice known as neighbor spoofing to trick consumers into answering calls. And then in September, the FCC issued a $37.5 million fine against an Arizona-based company for engaging in a similar practice. While the FCC took these actions against bad actors and serial violators of the TCPA, they show that the agency is taking TCPA violations more seriously than ever before, and that it is more important than ever for your company to comply with the statute.
Coming in at the 9th spot, on December 12, 2018, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals heard oral argument in a case that could have far-reaching implications for the TCPA. The case is Ron Golan versus FreeEats.com, and it looks at whether the TCPA statutory damages of $500 per message can be unconstitutional when applied in the context of class action litigation. The case stems from a call made using a recorded message from former Governor Mike Huckabee to promote a movie called Last Ounce of Courage during the 2016 presidential election. After finding that there was liability for the calls, District Judge Richard Weber determined that damages of $1.6 billion, which is what the statute called for, produced a result that was wholly disproportionate to the offense and was therefore unconstitutional as applied. The District Court then reduced the damages to $32.4 million, or $10 a call. During oral argument at the 8th Circuit, at least one of the judges expressed skepticism that the Supreme Court would accept the plaintiff's argument that the District Court had no authority to reduce the $1.6 billion award. If the 8th Circuit upholds the District Court's decision to reduce the damages, it would create important new precedent that could significantly alter how companies assess TCPA exposure in future cases.
Number 8 on the list are several new pieces of legislation introduced to the United States Congress that would amend the TCPA. First, the Stopping Bad Robocalls Act would have amended the TCPA to define robocall as including calls or texts made using equipment that stores numbers to be called. It will have also codified the right of consumers to revoke consent in any time and in any manner, broadening up this right and limiting the FCC's authority to debate these issues. Second, we have the Trace Act, which would have required voice service providers to adopt call authentication technology. It would have extended enforcement authorities not to other federal agencies as the DOJ and the CFPB, and it would have allowed the FCC to impose civil penalties of up to $10,000 per call to violators that disobey telemarketing rules. The nature of these new legislations are important because while they try to toughen up the TCPA, they do not address the predatory and abusive practices that legitimate businesses face.
Taking the number 7 spot are text message opt-out evaders. Opt-out evaders avoid opting out of text message campaigns by not following simple instructions as provided by the sender, such as reply stop to stop the text messages. They often send responses that do not clearly express an intent to opt out. Then they sue for subsequent text messages alleging that the sender did not have their consent to text. The 7th and the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals have both confirmed that consumers are not allowed to ignore clear opt-out instructions of the sender, so the sender can designate an exclusive means of opting out.
Number 6. 2018 saw the highly publicized and controversial nomination and eventual confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. On the TCPA Defense Force blog, we speculated about how Justice Kavanaugh's prior opinions, writings, and even his admiration of the late Justice Antonin Scalia could affect his approach to issues that come before the Supreme Court, particularly those surrounding the TCPA and judicial deference to federal regulatory agencies. And, as we'll discuss later in the countdown, our predictions are proving to be true.
Coming in at number 5, we have the issue of reassigned numbers database. Squeaking in right before the year's end, the FCC unanimously voted to adopt its proposed order mandating the creation of a single comprehensive reassigned number database. Beyond establishing a comprehensive reassigned number database that enables callers to verify whether a telephone number has been reassigned or permanently disconnected, the final order also created a very limited safe harbor provision that protects callers from TCPA liability.
And coming in at number 4 in our countdown is the FCC's declaratory ruling classifying SMS and MMS text messages as information services as opposed to telecommunication services. A telecommunication service classification would have prevented carriers from blocking text messages, including those they consider to be spam. But by classifying text messages as information services, the FCC gives carriers a legal right to block text messages and censor text message content without running afoul government regulation. Now, whether carriers will use this new ruling to simply block automatic text messages or block competitors' text messages, or perhaps even stifle free speech will definitely be an issue to keep an eye out in 2019.
Taking the number 3 spot, as was briefly described in number 6, the Supreme Court granted cert in PDR Network LLC versus Carlton & Harris Chiropractic Inc., a TCPA case regarding unsolicited fax advertisements. In short, the court will determine whether lower courts are bound by the FCC's legal interpretation of the TCPA under the Hobbs Act, or whether lower courts are free to apply their own understanding of the statutory language. In the second case, the Supreme Court also granted cert in Kaiser versus Wilkie, in which it will examine a legal deference doctrine known as Seminole Rock or oral deference. Combined, these two cases could fundamentally shift the interplay between courts and federal regulatory agencies in the United States, shifting power more to the courts and away from executive branch agencies.
This year's runner-up in the number 2 spot on our countdown is the debate over what constitutes an automated telephone dialing system under the TCPA. The statutory definition of an automated telephone dialing system is equipment that has the capacity to store or produce numbers to be called using a random or sequential number generator and to dial such numbers. In Marks v. Crunch San Diego LLC, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals held that the statutory definition of an ATDS was ambiguous. By implying its own interpretation of the statute, the Ninth Circuit essentially rewrote or redefined the TCPA. The court found that the term ATDS means equipment that has the capacity to store numbers to be called or to produce numbers to be called using a random or sequential number generator and to dial such numbers. By finding that an ATDS means equipment that merely stores numbers to be called, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals essentially includes everyday smartphones in the definition of what constitutes an automated telephone dialing system, a problem that the court in our number 1 spot sought to avoid, and it created a split amongst the courts.
The biggest TCPA news in 2018 was without a doubt the DC Circuit's decision in ACA International. There were several components to the ruling. First, and most importantly, the court struck down on the FCC's definition of an ATDS, which was broad enough to include ordinary cell phones. Second, the court set aside the FCC's ruling on reassigned numbers, finding that the one-call safe harbor was arbitrary and capricious. Third, the court upheld the FCC's ruling on revocation, finding that revocation can be by any reasonable means. And finally, the court upheld that certain healthcare-related calls are exempt from TCPA liability.
Wow, 2018 was a crazy year, filled with all kinds of blockbuster developments under the TCPA, and 2019 is shaping up to be just the same. I'm excited to be part of a team that can help you put the full court press on the TCPA, from litigation to compliance to regulatory advocacy before the FCC. And if you want to make sure that you stay up to speed on all the developments under the law, please go to www.tcpadefenseforce.com and subscribe to our blog. Folks, my name is Artine Betpera. I'm a partner at Womble Bond Dickinson's Costa Mesa office, and this has been the TCPA Defense Force 2018 TCPA Countdown. Thanks for tuning in.